Single dad farmer saves a pregnant millionaire nurse in Rainstorm. It's too deep, Evie's, the woman suddenly cried out, though she couldn't have known his name. She was looking down at the water now pooling around her feet inside the car, her breathing rapid and shallow. It's too deep. It hurts. Something in her voice, the raw vulnerability, the terror, the way she said words she couldn't have meant for him, struck Evie's in a place he thought had died 3 years ago when his wife walked out. He found himself moving on instinct, reaching into the car, sliding one arm under the woman's knees and another behind her back. Before we begin the beautiful story, please subscribe, it's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. The rain came down like bullets that October evening, turning the rural Oklahoma highway into a river of mud and regret. Evie's Thornwood's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup, his eyes scanning the flooded road ahead through the rhythmic swipe of failing windshield wipers. He was running late. Again. His 7-year-old daughter, Maya, would be waiting at Mrs. Henderson's house, probably pressed against the window, watching for his headlights. 34 weeks, the man answered, his voice tight with panic. I'm her brother, Thomas. We were driving to Oklahoma City, to her doctor, but the storm. He gestured helplessly at the submerged vehicle. The engine died, and now the water's rising and she's having contractions and... Let's begin. Just get home, he muttered to himself, squinting through the downpour. Just get home to her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The red sedan appeared suddenly in his peripheral vision, half submerged in the drainage ditch on the opposite side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked desperately through the sheets of rain like a dying heartbeat. Evers's foot moved to the brake pedal before his mind could fully process what he was seeing. Every fiber of his being screamed to keep driving. Maya was waiting, dinner needed making, and the storm was only getting worse. But then he saw her. A woman in a red dress, clearly pregnant, struggling to push open the driver's side door against the rising water. A man behind her, trying to help, both of them soaked and panicking. The scene lasted only seconds before Evie's had already pulled his truck to the side of the road, his door flying open as he jumped into the storm. Hold on, he shouted over the roar of wind and rain, his boots splashing through ankle-deep water on the road. I'm coming. The woman's head snapped up, and even through the rain, Evie's could see the fear in her eyes, and something else. Pain. Deep, visceral pain that made her face contort and her hands clutch her swollen belly. Please, she gasped as Evie's reached the car. Please help us. The baby, something's wrong. We need to get to the hospital, but the car... Her words cut off as another wave of pain hit her, and she cried out, doubling over. How far along are you? Evie's asked, his farmer's practicality kicking in even as his heart raced. 34 weeks, the man answered, his voice tight with panic. I'm her brother, Thomas. We were driving to Oklahoma City, to her doctor, but the storm... He gestured helplessly at the submerged vehicle. The engine died, and now the water's rising and she's having contractions and... It's too deep, Evie's, the woman suddenly cried out, though she couldn't have known his name. She was looking down at the water now pooling around her feet inside the car, her breathing rapid and shallow. It's too deep. It hurts. Something in her voice, the raw vulnerability, the terror, the way she said words she couldn't have meant for him, struck Evie's in a place he thought had died 3 years ago when his wife walked out. He found himself moving on instinct, reaching into the car, sliding one arm under the woman's knees and another behind her back. I've got you, he said firmly. I'm Evie's, and I'm going to get you somewhere safe. Thomas, grab whatever you need and follow me to the truck. The woman, he still didn't know her name, wrapped her arms around his neck as he lifted her from the car. She was lighter than he expected, despite the pregnancy, and he could feel her trembling against his chest. The rain plastered her dark hair to her face, and her red dress clung to her like a second skin. Up close, he could see the expensive jewelry at her throat, the manicured nails digging into his shoulder, the designer watch on her wrist. Everything about her screamed money and privilege, everything except the fear in her eyes, which was universal and human and real. "What's your name?" Evie's asked as he carried her through the rising water toward his truck, partly to keep her focused, partly because he needed to call her something other than the woman. "Pascaline," she managed between sharp breaths. "Pascaline DuPont." "And I." Another contraction seized her, and she buried her face against his shoulder, a sound somewhere between a moan and a scream escaping her lips. Evie's quickened his pace. The truck seemed miles away, though it was only yards. Behind him, he could hear Thomas splashing through the water, presumably gathering bags from the car. The storm intensified, lightning cracking across the sky like God's own fury, thunder following so close it seemed to shake the very ground. "Stay with me, Pascaline," Evie said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "We are almost there. Just breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it." He didn't know why he knew what to say. Maybe from when Sarah had been pregnant with Maya, back when they were still happy, still whole, still a family. Or maybe some instincts just never leave you, even when everything else does. They reached the truck, and Evie's carefully settled Pascaline into the passenger seat, reaching across to buckle her seatbelt below her belly. Her hands caught his wrist, and he looked up to find her staring at him with an intensity that made him momentarily forget the storm, the emergency, everything. "Thank you," she whispered, and he could see tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You don't know me. You have no reason to help me. But thank you." Evie's nodded, suddenly unable to speak, and pulled back to slam the door shut. Thomas scrambled into the back seat with two expensive-looking bags, and then Evie's was back behind the wheel, starting the engine, making a decision that would change all their lives. "The hospital in Mercy Creek is 20 minutes away," he said, pulling back onto the flooded highway. "Can you make it 20 minutes, Pascaline?" She was breathing hard, her hands pressed against her belly, her face pale even in the dim light of the truck's cab. "I don't think I have a choice," she said, then looked at him with eyes that held both gratitude and terror. "But, Evie's, I need you to know something. I'm a nurse. I work in emergency medicine. I've delivered babies. I know what's happening to my body, and I know," her voice cracked, "I know something's wrong. The contractions are too close together, too intense, and there's been blood." The word blood sent ice through Evers's veins. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the old truck protesting but responding. "Then we don't have 20 minutes, he said. "Hold on." As the truck plunged through the storm, racing against time and nature itself, Evie's couldn't help but think about the strange twists of fate. 6 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether the fall harvest would be enough to cover Maya's medical bills from her bout with pneumonia last spring. He'd been alone, had been alone for 3 years, ever since Sarah decided that being a farmer's wife in rural Oklahoma was beneath her, that the man she'd married was just a simple country boy with no ambition, that she wanted more than this from life. She'd left on a Tuesday morning, kissing Maya goodbye and telling her she'd see her soon. That was 1,127 days ago. Not that Evie's was counting. And now here he was, a stranger's life, 2 strangers' lives, literally in his hands. A pregnant millionaire nurse named Pascaline DuPont, who probably had more money in her bank account than Evie's would see in a lifetime, was trusting him completely in what might be the most terrifying moment of her life. "It hurts," Pascaline gasped, pulling Evie's from his thoughts. "Oh God, Evie's, it hurts so much." "I know," he said, though he didn't, not really. But he said it anyway because she needed to hear it. "We are going to get you help. Just hold on. Tell me something, Pascaline. Tell me about your baby. Is it a boy or a girl?" She took a shaky breath, clearly trying to focus on something other than the pain. "A girl," she said softly. "I'm having a daughter. I was going to name her Claire, after my mother." "Claire," Evie's repeated, and the name sounded like hope in the darkness of the storm. "That's beautiful. And Claire is going to be just fine. You both are. I promise you that." It was a promise he had no right to make, no power to keep. But sometimes, Evie's had learned, people don't need truth as much as they need hope. And hope was the one thing he could still give, even if he'd lost it for himself long ago. The lights of Mercy Creek appeared in the distance, blurred by rain but unmistakable. Pascaline let out a sound that might have been relief or might have been another contraction. Evie's couldn't tell. In the back seat, Thomas was on his phone, presumably calling ahead to the hospital. "We are going to make it," Evie said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We are going to make it." But even as he said the words, Pascaline's head rolled back against the seat, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid, and Evie's felt fear, real, visceral fear, for the first time since the night Maya had stopped breathing in her sleep and he'd had to perform CPR until the ambulance arrived. "Pascaline," he said urgently. "Pascaline, stay with me. We are almost there. Just a little bit further." Her eyes opened, unfocused, and she turned to look at him. "Evie's," she whispered, "if something happens to me, promise me you'll make sure Claire." "Nothing's going to happen to you," he interrupted firmly. "Nothing. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine. You're going to hold your daughter and watch her grow up and tell her about the crazy night she was almost born in a farmer's pickup truck during the worst storm Oklahoma has seen in a decade. That's what's going to happen." The hospital appeared ahead, its emergency room entrance lit up like a beacon. Evie's pulled the truck right up to the doors, not caring about designated parking or protocols or anything except getting Pascaline inside. Medical staff were already rushing out with a gurney. Thomas must have called ahead, and suddenly everything was motion and noise and controlled chaos. As they lifted Pascaline from his truck onto the gurney, her hand shot out and grabbed Devis's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his, clear now despite the pain, and she said something that would echo in his mind for days, weeks, months to come. "Don't leave," she said. "Please, Evie's, don't leave me." He should have said yes, should have promised to stay, should have followed her into that hospital and seen this through to the end. But instead, he froze. Because the last time someone had asked him not to leave, it had been Sarah, and he'd stayed, and she'd left anyway. And Maya was waiting at Mrs. Henderson's house, had been waiting for over an hour now, and he'd already failed one person he loved by not being there. He started, but the medical team was already rushing Pascaline through the automatic doors, and Thomas was following, and the moment was lost. Evie stood in the rain, water dripping from his hair, his clothes soaked through, watching the doors close behind them. His truck sat there with the driver's door still open, engine still running, completely out of place in the ambulance bay. "Sir, you need to move your vehicle," a security guard was saying, but Evie's barely heard him. He'd made a choice. He'd chosen Maya over a stranger, his daughter over a woman he'd known for all of 30 minutes. It was the right choice. The only choice. So why did it feel like he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life? 3 days passed before Evie's learned the truth about Pascaline DuPont, and when he did, it came not from her but from his daughter. Maya was sitting at their kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her, when she suddenly looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that were so much like her mother's it sometimes hurt to look at them. "Daddy," she said, "did you know that the lady who gives money to my school is in the hospital?" Evie's, who'd been washing dishes, felt his hand still in the soapy water. "What lady, sweet pea?" "Miss Pascaline. Miss Pascaline DuPont. She pays for our library and our computers, and she buys lunch for kids whose parents can't afford it. Mrs. Henderson told me. She said Miss Pascaline is very sick and might not get better, and we should all pray for her." The plate Evie's had been holding slipped from his fingers and clattered into the sink. Pascaline DuPont wasn't just a wealthy woman who happened to be passing through. She was the Pascaline DuPont, the millionaire philanthropist who'd been quietly supporting rural Oklahoma schools for years. The woman whose family had made a fortune in oil and gas, who could have lived anywhere in the world but had chosen to dedicate her life to helping people in the very communities where her family's wealth had been extracted. And Evie's had left her at the hospital doors and driven away. "Daddy." Maya's voice was concerned now. "Are you okay? You look funny." "I'm fine, baby," Evie's managed. "Just surprised. When did Mrs. Henderson tell you this?" "This morning, when you dropped me off. She was crying. She said Miss Pascaline was having a baby, but something went wrong, and now both of them might die, And it's just so sad because Miss Pascaline is such a good person and the world needs more good people. Evie's felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Michti. Both of them. He thought about Pascaline's face in his truck, the way she'd looked at him with such trust, such hope. He thought about her hand gripping his wrist, her voice saying, "Don't leave." He thought about a baby girl named Claire who might never get to meet her mother, who might enter this world already marked by loss. "Daddy, you're scaring me," Maya said, and Evie's realized he'd been standing frozen at the sink, water dripping from his hands, staring at nothing. "Sorry, sweet pea," he said, drying his hands and kneeling beside her chair. I met Miss Pascaline. The night of the big storm. I helped her get to the hospital." Maya's eyes went wide. "You did? You're like a hero. Did you save her life?" "I don't know," Evie said honestly. "I just gave her a ride. Anyone would have done the same." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The highway had been empty that night except for them. If he'd driven past, if he decided Maya needed him more than a stranger in a ditch, Pascaline would have died in that car. Her baby would have died. The world would have lost a good person, just like Mrs. Henderson said. "Can we go visit her?" Maya asked suddenly. "Can we bring her flowers? Mrs. Henderson says flowers make sick people feel better." Evie should have said no. Should have explained that they didn't know Pascaline personally, that hospitals had visiting restrictions, that it wasn't appropriate to intrude on a stranger's medical crisis. But instead, he found himself nodding. "Yeah, sweet pea. I think we can do that." The Mercy Creek Community Hospital was small by city standards, only 80 beds and 2 operating rooms, but it served a wide area of rural Oklahoma with dedication, if not always the latest equipment. Evie's had been there too many times over the years, when his father had his heart attack, when Maya had pneumonia, when various farm accidents had required stitches or x-rays, or once, memorably, an emergency surgery to remove a fishhook from his thumb. But he'd never felt this nervous walking through those automatic doors. Maya held his hand tightly, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers they'd picked from the far field, purple asters and black-eyed Susans, bright yellow coreopsis and delicate white yarrow. They weren't fancy, weren't from a florist, but they were honest and beautiful in their simplicity. Like everything else in Evers's life. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, looking up from her computer with a practiced smile. "We are here to see Pascaline DuPont," Evie said, his voice rougher than he intended. I'm the man who brought her in. During the storm. And this is my daughter, Maya. We wanted to check on her, make sure she's okay." The receptionist's expression shifted, becoming warmer. "Oh, Mr. Thornwood. Yes, Miss DuPont asked about you." "Well, she asked about the farmer, and we didn't know who she meant, but wait here just a moment." She picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, and a few minutes later, Thomas appeared, looking exhausted but significantly less panicked than he had during the storm. "Evie's," Thomas said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice as he shook Evers's hand. "I'm glad you came. Pascaline has been asking about you. She wanted to thank you properly." "How is she?" Evie's asked, almost afraid of the answer. "And the baby?" Thomas's face broke into a tired but genuine smile. "They're okay. Both of them. It was touch and go for a while. Pascaline had something called placental abruption, which is extremely dangerous, but the doctors here were incredible. They had to do an emergency C-section, and Claire was born at 3 pounds, 6 ounces. She's in the NICU, but she's strong. Fighting. Just like her mother." Relief flooded through Evie so intensely he had to steady himself against the reception desk. "Thank God," he breathed. "Can we see her?" Maya asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Miss Pascaline, I mean? I brought her flowers." Thomas looked down at Maya with a soft expression. "You must be the daughter Evie's couldn't stop talking about during the drive." "Yes, I think Pascaline would love to see you both. Fair warning though, she's on a lot of pain medication and might be a bit loopy." They followed Thomas through the hospital corridors, past rooms where machines beeped and monitors glowed, where the smell of antiseptic mixed with the subtler sense of illness and healing. Maya's hand tightened in Evers's, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. Room 237 was at the end of the hall, its door partially open. Thomas knocked softly, and a voice from within, Pascaline's voice, though weaker than Evie's remembered, called out, "Come in." Nothing could have prepared Evie for the sight of Pascaline DuPont in a hospital bed. During the storm, she'd been beautiful but terrifying in her vulnerability, a woman in crisis, reduced to her most basic human need, survival. Now, 3 days later, she was something else entirely. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her face pale but peaceful, her expensive jewelry replaced by a simple hospital gown. And 4-line ran from her arm to a bag of fluids, and monitors tracked her vitals with soft, rhythmic beeps. But it was her eyes that struck Evie's most. They were the same eyes that had looked at him in the truck with such trust, such desperate hope, but now they held something else too. Recognition, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name, but that made his breath catch in his throat. "Evie's," she said, and her voice was like music. "You came." He stopped, suddenly unsure what to say. "I wanted to check on you. Make sure you were okay. This is my daughter, Maya. She wanted to bring you flowers." Maya stepped forward, suddenly shy, and held out the bouquet of wildflowers. "Mrs. Henderson says you help our school," she said softly. "Thank you for that. And I'm sorry you got sick." Pascaline's eyes filled with tears as she took the flowers, holding them like they were made of gold. "These are the most beautiful flowers anyone has ever given me," she said, and Evie's could tell she meant it. "Thank you, Maya. You're very sweet." "How are you feeling?" Evie's asked, moving closer to the bed. Thomas said there were complications. Pascaline nodded, her expression growing more serious. "Placental abruption. If we'd been 20 minutes later getting here, Claire and Di would both have died. The doctors said." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "They said you saved our lives, Evie's. By stopping, by helping, by getting us here so fast. You saved us." Evie's shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Pascaline said firmly, and now those unnamed emotions in her eyes crystallized into something clearer, conviction. The highway was empty that night. You were the only one who stopped. You were the only one who cared enough about two strangers to put yourself at risk in a dangerous storm. That's not anyone. That's someone special. Evie's felt heat rise to his face. He wasn't used to compliments, wasn't used to being seen as anything other than just a farmer, the label Sarah had used so dismissively when she left. "Can I see the baby?" Maya asked suddenly, breaking the tension. "Claire, I've never seen a real newborn baby before." Pascaline smiled sadly. "She's in the neonatal intensive care unit because she was born premature. Only family can visit right now. But..." She looked at Evie's with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thomas, could you take Maya to get some hot chocolate from the cafeteria? I need to talk to Evie's privately for a moment." Thomas nodded, understanding something Evie's didn't, and held out his hand to Maya. "Come on, kiddo. Let's see if they have cookies too." When they were gone, the room seemed suddenly smaller, more intimate. Evie found himself acutely aware of everything, the way the afternoon light filtered through the blinds, the way Pascaline's fingers played with the petals of Maya's wildflowers, the way his heart was beating faster than it had any reason to. "Evie's," Pascaline said quietly, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen until I'm finished, okay?" He nodded, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "When you pulled me from that car," she began, "when you carried me through that storm, I was convinced I was going to die. I'd felt the blood, understood what was happening medically, and I knew the statistics. I knew Claire and I were likely running out of time. And in that moment, the only thing I could think about was regret." She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing that night again. "I regretted that I'd never gotten to hold my daughter, never gotten to tell her I loved her. I regretted that I'd spent so much of my life focused on work, on my career, on building this image of the successful, independent woman who didn't need anyone. I regretted that I'd pushed away every man who tried to get close to me because I was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being hurt. And most of all, I regretted that I would die without ever really knowing what it felt like to be saved, not just physically, but emotionally, by someone who asked for nothing in return. Evers's throat felt tight. Pascaline. Let me finish, she said gently. When you picked me up, when you held me against your chest and carried me through that water, I felt something I'd never felt before. Safety. Complete, absolute safety. Not because of your strength, though you were strong. Not because of your decisiveness, though you were decisive. But because for those few minutes, I wasn't a millionaire or a nurse or a woman with a reputation to maintain. I was just a person who needed help. And you gave it without question, without expectation, without any thought of what you might gain. She reached out and took his hand, and Evie felt electricity run through him at the contact. And then, at the hospital doors, I begged you not to leave. And you did. And I understood why. Your daughter needed you, and a father who puts his child first is exactly the kind of person who would stop on a highway during a storm to help a stranger. But Evie, for 3 days I've been lying in this hospital bed, alive because of you, holding a daughter who's alive because of you, and all I can think about is that moment when you drove away. I'm sorry, Evie said, his voice rough. I should have stayed. I should have.
No, Pascaline interrupted.
You shouldn't have. You made the right choice. Your daughter needed you. But now I need you to hear this. I want you to stay now. Not at the hospital, but in my life. In Claire's life. I don't know what that means yet, and I'm not asking for anything specific. I'm just saying that you saved my life, and I don't want you to be a stranger. I don't want you to be someone I think about and wonder whatever happened to. I want to know you, Evie Thornwood. I want Claire to know you. And I want to figure out if this feeling I have, this certainty that you're someone important, someone who changed everything by making one simple choice to stop, means what I think it might mean. Evie stared at her, his mind racing. This was insane. He was a broke farmer with a 7-year-old daughter and a failing harvest and medical bills he couldn't pay. She was a millionaire philanthropist who probably had a mansion in Oklahoma City and a social circle that included governors and oil barons and people who'd never had dirt under their fingernails. They had nothing in common except one storm and one drive and one moment where their lives had intersected. But looking into her eyes, seeing the vulnerability and honesty there, Evie found himself thinking about something his father had told him years ago. Son, life is long and short at the same time. Long enough to make a million small choices that don't matter much, but short enough that the few big choices you make define everything. When you get a chance at something real, something that makes your heart beat faster and your hands shake and your mind tell you it's impossible, that's when you say yes. Because those moments don't come along often, and if you let them pass by out of fear or practicality or just plain stubbornness, you'll regret it every day for the rest of your life. Okay, Evie's heard himself say. Okay, Pascaline. I'll stay. And in that moment, in that small hospital room with wildflowers on the bedside table and monitors beeping softly and afternoon light painting everything gold, Evie Thornwood made the second most important decision of his life. The first had been stopping on that highway during the storm. This one, this choice to stay, to take a chance on something impossible and terrifying and potentially wonderful, would define everything that came after. For 3 weeks, Evie's visited Pascaline and Claire at the hospital every day. He'd drop Maya off at school, handle whatever couldn't be postponed at the farm, and then make the 20-minute drive to Mercy Creek, usually arriving around 10 in the morning and staying until mid-afternoon when he had to pick Maya up. They talked about everything and nothing. Pascaline told him about growing up as the daughter of oil tycoons, about the private schools and debutante balls and the crushing pressure to marry someone appropriate, meaning someone from their social circle, someone with the right connections and pedigree. She told him about her decision to become a nurse instead of joining the family business, about the way her parents had reacted with horror and disappointment, about earning her own money and making her own path. Evie's told her about the farm, 4 generations of Thornwoods working the same land, growing wheat and corn and soybeans, fighting drought and debt and the endless pressures of agribusiness. He told her about Sarah, something he rarely talked about with anyone, about how they'd met in high school and married too young and grown apart as they grew up. About the morning she'd left and the divorce papers that had arrived 3 months later, already signed, with a note that just said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." He told her about Maya, about the way she laughed at terrible dad jokes and loved reading and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, about the pneumonia scare that had nearly killed her and the medical bills that were still crushing him, about the way she was so much smarter and braver than he'd ever been, and how being her father was the only thing he'd ever done that felt important. And Pascaline listened. Really listened, in a way Evie's hadn't experienced since. Well, maybe ever. She didn't try to fix things or offer advice unless he asked. She just created space for him to be himself, completely and honestly, without judgment or expectation. On the 8th day, they took their first walk together, Pascaline in a wheelchair, Evie's pushing, making slow circuits around the hospital's indoor courtyard while Claire slept peacefully in the NICU. Pascaline pointed out constellations through the skylight, even though it was daytime and you couldn't see stars, explaining what each one meant in mythology. Evie's found himself entranced not by the stories but by the way she told them, her hands moving expressively, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. On the 12th day, they let Pascaline hold Claire for the first time since the birth. Evie's was there, standing beside the hospital bed, watching as the tiny 3-pound baby, now 3 pounds, 9 ounces, and growing, was placed in her mother's arms. The look on Pascaline's face was something Evie's would remember for the rest of his life. Pure, overwhelming, transcendent love. "Do you want to hold her?" Pascaline asked softly, and Evie's first instinct was to refuse. But Pascaline was already shifting, already extending the baby toward him, and suddenly Claire was in his arms, this impossibly small, impossibly perfect human being whose life he'd helped save. Claire opened her eyes and looked directly at him, and Evie's felt something crack open in his chest. Some part of himself he'd been keeping carefully locked away since Sarah left, since he'd learned that love could hurt and people could leave and nothing was permanent or guaranteed. "Hi, Claire," he whispered, and the baby made a small sound that might have been random but felt like recognition. On the 17th day, Pascaline was cleared to leave the hospital, though Claire would need to stay in the NICU for at least another week or two until she reached a safer weight. Thomas had been handling Pascaline's affairs during her hospitalization, but he needed to return to his own life, his wife and kids in Tulsa, his job as an architect, his responsibilities that had been on hold for nearly 3 weeks. "I've arranged for a nurse to stay with you at the house," Thomas told Pascaline as he packed up her room. "And there's a car service that can bring you to the hospital every day to see Claire. You'll be fine." But Pascaline looked at Evie's with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that meant she was about to say something that would change things. "Actually," she said, "I was hoping Evie's might be willing to help me instead." Thomas stopped packing and looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. "Pascaline, you can't possibly ask him to." "I'm not asking him to do anything he doesn't want to do," Pascaline interrupted firmly. "I'm offering him a job. A paying job. I need someone to drive me to the hospital every day, to help around the house while I recover, to just be there. Evie's, I know you have your farm and Maya to think about, but I would pay you well. Very well. And Maya could come too. There's plenty of space, and she could do her homework at the hospital or at the house, wherever works best." Evie's felt his pride bristle. He didn't need charity, didn't need handouts from a millionaire who probably felt like she owed him something. He'd helped her because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected payment. But then he thought about the medical bills stacked on his kitchen table, about the harvest that had come in under projections, about the notice from the bank that had arrived yesterday, warning that he was 3 months behind on the mortgage and they were concerned about his ability to meet his obligations. About Maya, who deserved better than a father who was too proud to accept help when it was offered. "How much?" he asked quietly. Pascaline named a figure that was more than Evie's made in 3 months of farming. "For how long?" "A month," Pascaline said. "Maybe 2, depending on how my recovery goes. And Evie's, this isn't charity. This is me hiring someone I trust for a job I genuinely need done. You saved my life. The least you can do is let me pay you for your time." Put that way, it was hard to argue. And the money would change everything. Would catch up the mortgage, pay off the medical bills, Maybe even leave enough to fix the tractor that had been sitting broken in the barn for 8 months. Okay, Evie said. But I have conditions. I'll drive you and help out, but I'm not a servant. I eat meals with you, not in a separate room. Maya does her homework at the dining table, not hidden away. And if at any point this starts feeling like charity instead of a job, I walk away. Deal? Pascaline smiled, and it was like the sun coming out after a storm. Deal. Pascaline's house was not what Evie's expected. He'd imagined a mansion, something ostentatious with columns and a fountain and probably a tennis court. What he found instead was a large but comfortable farmhouse on the outskirts of Mercy Creek, set on 20 acres of rolling Oklahoma prairie. It had a wraparound porch, a garden that had been clearly loved but recently neglected, and a barn that reminded him painfully of his own. "This is where you live?" he asked as he helped Pascaline from the car. She smiled, leaning on his arm as they walked slowly toward the porch. Surprised. Most people. They expect something more. Grand. But I grew up in grand. I grew up with servants and marble floors and rooms I was afraid to enter because everything was too expensive to touch. When I finally had my own money, my own choices, I wanted something that felt like a home. Something real. Maya had run ahead and was already exploring the porch, peering through windows with her face pressed against the glass. "Daddy, there's a swing inside. A swing in the house." Everything Sarah had left him to find, Evie's had apparently found without her. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she deleted from her contacts but never from her memory. "Evie's," she said when he answered, her voice catching on his name. "It's Sarah. We need to talk. I'm coming home." Evie stood on the porch, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone after Sarah had hung up. His hand was trembling slightly, though whether from shock or anger or some complicated mixture of emotions he couldn't name, he wasn't sure. Who was that? Pascaline's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "My ex-wife," Evie said, his voice flat. "She's coming here. To Mercy Creek. She said we need to talk." Pascaline's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Did she say what about?
No.
Just that she'd seen the news about you and Claire, and she's concerned about Maya being involved in this situation. He practically spat the last words. 3 years of silence, and now she's concerned. Pascaline moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Evie's, if you need to leave, if you need to deal with this without the complication of being here."
No, Evie's interrupted firmly.
"I made a commitment to you. I don't break commitments, unlike some people." He immediately regretted the bitterness in his voice. "I am sorry. This isn't your problem." "If it affects you, it affects me," Pascaline said simply. "And if it affects Maya, then I want to help however I can. When is Sarah coming?" "Tomorrow, apparently. She's driving from Dallas." They stood together in the darkness, and Evie's felt the peaceful contentment from earlier in the evening evaporate like morning dew. Sarah. After 3 years of absence, of silence, of leaving him to pick up the pieces and figure out how to be both father and mother to a heartbroken 4-year-old, she was coming back. And Evie's had no idea what that meant or what she wanted, but every instinct in his body screamed danger. Sarah Thornwood arrived at 2:17 p.m. the next day, driving a BMW that probably cost more than Evers's farm was worth. She looked different than he remembered. Her hair was professionally styled, her clothes were designer, her nails were manicured. She looked like the person she'd always wanted to be, the person she'd left him to become. Evie's met her in the driveway of Pascaline's house, deliberately positioning himself so she couldn't see the house clearly, couldn't see inside, couldn't intrude more than necessary. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Evie's." She stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning him with an expression he couldn't read. "You look good. Different, but good." "What do you want, Sarah? You said we needed to talk, so talk." She flinched at his tone but recovered quickly. "I saw the news about you and that woman, Pascaline DuPont. I saw that you're living here, that Maya is here with you, and she paused, seeming to gather her courage. "I made a mistake, Evie's. Leaving you. Leaving Maya. I thought I needed something more, something bigger, but I was wrong. And now I see you've moved on, found someone who can give you everything I couldn't, and I realize what I lost." Evie stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You left 3 years ago, Sarah. 3 years. You didn't call, didn't visit, barely sent child support. Maya asked about you every day for the first year. Every single day. Do you know what that was like? Trying to explain to our daughter why her mother didn't want her anymore. I did want her. Sarah's voice rose. I do want her. I was lost. Evie's. I felt trapped and suffocated, and I needed to figure out who I was outside of being a farmer's wife in a small town. But I've figured it out now, and I want to come back. I want to try again. I want my family back. You don't have a family here anymore, Evie said, and the words felt like stones. You gave that up when you walked away. Maya and I have built a life without you. A good life. And you don't get to just show up and disrupt that because you changed your mind. Sarah's eyes hardened. I'm her mother, Evie's. I have rights. And if you're living here with some woman, exposing our daughter to an inappropriate relationship. Stop, Evie's commanded, his voice cold. Don't you dare come at me about what's appropriate for Maya. You abandoned her. I've been there for every school play, every doctor's appointment, every nightmare, every triumph. I've earned the right to make decisions about her life. You haven't. I'm her mother, Sarah repeated, and now there were tears in her eyes. That doesn't change just because I made mistakes. I love her, Evie's. I love both of you. And I want a chance to prove that I've changed, that I can be the wife and mother you both deserved. Before Evie's could respond, the front door of the house opened and Pascaline stepped out, moving slowly but deliberately down the porch steps. She was still recovering, still not supposed to be on her feet much, but her posture was straight and her gaze was steady as she approached. You must be Sarah, Pascaline said, extending her hand. I'm Pascaline DuPont. I've heard a lot about you. Sarah ignored the offered hand, her eyes taking in Pascaline's expensive casual clothes, her natural elegance, the confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. I'm sure you have, she said coolly. And I'm sure Evie's didn't mention that we are still married. The words landed like a bomb in the quiet afternoon. Everything Sarah had left him to find, Evie's had apparently found without her. She picked up a phone and dialed a number she deleted from her contacts but never from her memory. Evie's, she said when he answered, her voice catching on his name. It's Sarah. We need to talk. I'm coming home. Evie stood on the porch, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone after Sarah had hung up. His hand was trembling slightly, though whether from shock or anger or some complicated mixture of emotions he couldn't name, he wasn't sure. Who was that? Pascaline's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. My ex-wife, Evie said, his voice flat. She's coming here. To Mercy Creek. She said we need to talk. Pascaline's expression shifted through several emotions, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Did she say what about? No. Just that she'd seen the news about you and Claire, and she's concerned about Maya being involved in this situation. He practically spat the last words. 3 years of silence, and now she's concerned. Pascaline moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Evie's, if you need to leave, if you need to deal with this without the complication of being here.
No, Evie's interrupted firmly.
I made a commitment to you. I don't break commitments, unlike some people. He immediately regretted the bitterness in his voice. I am sorry. This isn't your problem. If it affects you, it affects me, Pascaline said simply. And if it affects Maya, then I want to help however I can. When is Sarah coming? Tomorrow, apparently. She's driving from Dallas. They stood together in the darkness, and Evie's felt the peaceful contentment from earlier in the evening evaporate like morning dew. Sarah, after 3 years of absence, of silence, of leaving him to pick up the pieces and figure out how to be both father and mother to a heartbroken 4-year-old, she was coming back. And Evie's had no idea what that meant or what she wanted, but every instinct in his body screamed danger. Sarah Thornwood arrived at 2:17 p.m. the next day, driving a BMW that probably cost more than Evers's farm was worth. She looked different than he remembered. Her hair was professionally styled, her clothes were designer, her nails were manicured. She looked like the person she'd always wanted to be, the person she'd left him to become. Evie's met her in the driveway of Pascaline's house, deliberately positioning himself so she couldn't see the house clearly, couldn't see inside, couldn't intrude more than necessary. Sarah, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Evie's. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning him with an expression he couldn't read. You look good. Different, but good. What do you want, Sarah? You said we needed to talk, so talk. She flinched at his tone but recovered quickly. I saw the news about you and that woman, Pascaline DuPont. I saw that you're living here, that Maya is here with you, and she paused, seeming to gather her courage. I made a mistake, Evie's. Leaving you. Leaving Maya. I thought I needed something more, something bigger, but I was wrong. And now I see you've moved on, found someone who can give you everything I couldn't, and I realize what I lost. Evie stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You left 3 years ago, Sarah. 3 years. You didn't call, didn't visit, barely sent child support. Maya asked about you every day for the first year. Every single day. Do you know what that was like? Trying to explain to our daughter why her mother didn't want her anymore. I did want her. Sarah's voice rose. I do want her. I was lost. Evie's. I felt trapped and suffocated, and I needed to figure out who I was outside of being a farmer's wife in a small town. But I've figured it out now, and I want to come back. I want to try again. I want my family back. You don't have a family here anymore, Evie said, and the words felt like stones. You gave that up when you walked away. Maya and I have built a life without you. A good life. And you don't get to just show up and disrupt that because you changed your mind. Sarah's eyes hardened. I'm her mother, Evie's. I have rights. And if you're living here with some woman, exposing our daughter to an inappropriate relationship. Stop, Evie's commanded, his voice cold. Don't you dare come at me about what's appropriate for Maya. You abandoned her. I've been there for every school play, every doctor's appointment, every nightmare, every triumph. I've earned the right to make decisions about her life. You haven't. I'm her mother, Sarah repeated, and now there were tears in her eyes. That doesn't change just because I made mistakes. I love her, Evie's. I love both of you. And I want a chance to prove that I've changed, that I can be the wife and mother you both deserved. Before Evie's could respond, the front door of the house opened and Pascaline stepped out, moving slowly but deliberately down the porch steps. She was still recovering, still not supposed to be on her feet much, but her posture was straight and her gaze was steady as she approached. You must be Sarah, Pascaline said, extending her hand. I'm Pascaline DuPont. I've heard a lot about you. Sarah ignored the offered hand, her eyes taking in Pascaline's expensive casual clothes, her natural elegance, the confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. I'm sure you have, she said coolly. And I'm sure Evie's didn't mention that we are still married. The words landed like a bomb in the quiet afternoon. What? Evie said sharply. Sarah, we've been divorced for almost 3 years. The papers were never filed, Sarah interrupted, turning back to him with a small, triumphant smile. I signed them, yes, but I never actually submitted them to the court. I kept meaning to, but I couldn't let go. So legally, Evie's, you're still my husband. And that means Maya is still living in a 2-parent household, even if we are separated. Which gives me legal standing to petition for custody if I believe she's being raised in an inappropriate environment. Pascaline's hand found Evie's, squeezing it gently. There's nothing inappropriate about Evie's working for me while I recover from a medical emergency, she said calmly. And threatening custody battles isn't in Maya's best interest, is it? What's in Maya's best interest, Sarah said, her voice sharp, is having her mother back in her life. And her father focused on his family instead of playing house with a millionaire. Playing house. Evie's repeated, anger finally breaking through his careful control. I saved her life, Sarah. Pascaline and her baby would have died if I hadn't stopped that night. And yes, I'm working for her now, because unlike you, I actually need the money. I've been drowning in medical bills and mortgage payments and all the expenses you left me with when you decided being a mother was too inconvenient. So don't you dare come here with your new car and your designer clothes and judge me for accepting honest work. Sarah's face crumpled, and for a moment, Evie saw the woman he'd married, young and vulnerable and scared. I know I hurt you, she said softly. I know I hurt Maya. But people change, Evie's. People grow. I'm not the same person who left. I've been in therapy, working through my issues, understanding why I ran. And I'm ready now, ready to be the partner you needed, the mother Maya deserved. Please, just give me a chance to prove it. Evie felt Pascaline's hand tighten in his, felt her presence beside him, solid and supportive and real. He thought about the past 3 weeks, about the conversations and the laughter and the slow building of something he'd been afraid to name. He thought about how Pascaline had looked at him in the hospital, the way she'd said she wanted him in her life, in Claire's life. And then he thought about Maya, about what she needed, what she deserved, about whether denying her a chance to have her mother back was protecting her or hurting her. I need to think about this, he said finally. And I need to talk to Maya. She's the one who matters here, Sarah. Not you, not me. Her. If she wants to see you, to give you a chance, then we'll figure something out. But it's her choice. Sarah's face brightened with hope. Can I see her? Please. Evie's. Just let me see my daughter. Evie's looked at Pascaline, who nodded slightly, understanding what he was asking without words. Wait here, he said. I'll go get her. Maya was in the sunroom, curled up on the indoor swing with a book, when Evie's found her. She looked up as he entered, and he could see in her eyes that she'd heard some of the conversation outside. The walls weren't that thick, and voices had been raised. Is that Mom? She asked quietly. Evie's nodded, settling onto the swing beside her. Yeah, sweet pea. It's your Mom. She wants to see you. Maya was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her book. Why did she come back? She says she made a mistake leaving, that she wants to try again, to be part of our lives. What do you want, Daddy? The question caught Evie's off guard. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old but wise beyond her years, forced to grow up too fast by circumstances beyond her control, and felt his heart break a little. What I want doesn't matter, he said gently. This is about what you want. Do you want to see your Mom? It's okay if you do, and it's okay if you don't. No one will be mad at you either way. Maya thought about this, her face serious. Will you be there? When I see her? If you want me to be, yes. Absolutely. And Miss Pascaline? She won't leave because Mom came back. Evie's felt a lump form in his throat. Maya had gotten attached to Pascaline over the past weeks, had started referring to her visits to the hospital to see baby Claire as visiting my little sister, had started asking Pascaline questions about nursing and college and all the things Maya wanted to know about growing up.
No, eso es peor.
Miss Pascaline isn't going anywhere. This is her home, and she wants us here. Maya nodded, seeming to find courage in his answers. Okay, I'll see Mom, but only for a little bit, and you have to stay with me the whole time. I promise. They walked outside together, Maya's hand gripped tightly in Evers's. Sarah was still standing in the driveway, but her confident posture had crumbled somewhat. When she saw Maya, her face transformed, love and regret and desperate hope all mixing together. Hi, baby, Sarah said, her voice breaking. God, you've gotten so big. Sarah was claiming that he'd abandoned his marital responsibilities by moving in with another woman, that he was exposing Maya to an immoral lifestyle, that his financial instability made him an unfit primary parent. She was asking for 50-50 as custody, with the eventual goal of primary custody once she'd established a stable home environment. Evie's called the only lawyer he knew, Bob Fletcher, who'd handled his parents' estate and occasionally helped local farmers with contracts. Bob listened to the situation and sighed deeply. Evie's, I'm going to be straight with you. Family law isn't my specialty, and Sarah's attorney is one of the best in the state. You need someone who can match her firepower. But that kind of lawyer costs money, a lot of money. How much? Bob named a figure that made Evers's stomach drop. More than he made in a year, even with what Pascaline was paying him. I don't have that, Evie said quietly. Then you need to find it, son. Because without proper representation, you could lose Maya. Pascaline found him an hour later, still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the papers. She took one look at his face and set Claire's carrier down, moving to sit beside him. What happened? He told her everything, the custody filing, the accusations, the cost of fighting it. I'll pay for your lawyer, Pascaline said immediately.
No.
Evie's. No, he repeated firmly. I won't let you do that. This is my problem, my fight. I won't take your money for this. You're not taking it, Pascaline argued. I'm offering it. There's a difference. Evie's, you saved my life and Claire's life. Let me help you save your life with Maya. If I let you pay for my lawyer, Sarah's attorney will use it against me. She'll say I'm dependent on you, that I'm using you for your money, that I'm not standing on my own 2 feet. It'll make everything worse. Pascaline was quiet for a moment. Then let me hire you permanently. Not just for these 2 months, but as my estate manager. Managing this property, helping with Claire, coordinating my charitable work. A real job with a real salary that would more than cover legal fees and get you out of debt. Not charity, employment. Based on your skills and work ethic, which I've seen firsthand for weeks now. Evie's looked at her, searching her face for any sign of pity or condescension. But all he saw was determination and care and a practical solution to a real problem. You'd really do that? I need someone I trust, Pascaline said simply. Someone with integrity and work ethic and common sense. Someone who treats me like a person instead of a checkbook. That's you, Evie's. So yes, I'd really do that. The question is whether you'll accept. It went against every prideful instinct Evie's had. But he thought about Maya, about the risk of losing her, about what mattered more, his pride or his daughter. Okay, he said. Yes, I accept. Pascaline smiled and pulled out her phone. I know someone. A family law attorney in Tulsa who's brilliant and has never lost a custody case when the parent she's representing deserves to keep their child. Her name is Jennifer Ortiz, and she owes me a favor. Let me make a call. Jennifer Ortiz was a force of nature, mid-40s, razor-sharp in a tailored suit, with an air of absolute competence that made Evie's feel simultaneously relieved and intimidated. She met with them 2 days after Pascaline's call, driving down from Tulsa to review the case. Okay, Jennifer said, spreading the documents across Pascaline's dining table. Let's be clear about what we are dealing with. Sarah's attorney is good, but she's playing a hand that looks stronger than it is. The core of her case rests on 3 claims: that you're financially unstable, that you're living in an inappropriate situation, and that you're neglecting Maya's need for maternal influence. We need to dismantle all 3. How? Evie's asked. Financial stability. We document your new employment with Pascaline, show steady income and responsible financial planning. That's easy. Living situation. We demonstrate that this is a legitimate employment arrangement, that you have separate quarters, that Maya has her own room and is thriving in this environment. Also straightforward. Jennifer paused, tapping her pen against the papers. The maternal influence claim is trickier. Sarah has 3 years of absence to overcome, but she's going to argue that she's reformed, that she's stable now, that Maya needs a mother. We need to counter that not with claims that Sarah is a bad person, but with evidence that Maya's current situation is meeting all her emotional, psychological, and developmental needs, and that disrupting her life would cause harm. I can help with that, Pascaline said quietly. I can testify about Maya's well-being, about the stability of this arrangement. I can bring in Claire's pediatrician to discuss the positive impacts of the environment here. I can. No, Jennifer interrupted gently but firmly. Ms. DuPont, I appreciate your willingness to help, but you're already a complication in this case. Your involvement, no matter how innocent, is being used against Evie's. The more you testify, the more ammunition we give Sarah's attorney to paint this as an inappropriate relationship that's putting Evie's judgment at risk. But that's not, Pascaline started. I know it's not. But perception matters in family court. What we need is external validation. Maya's teachers, her pediatrician, perhaps a child psychologist who can evaluate her current adjustment and testify about her needs. We build a case that Maya is thriving, that she has everything she needs, and that introducing significant change at this point would be detrimental. Jennifer looked directly at Evie's. I also need to ask you some hard questions. Is there any truth to Sarah's claim that you and Pascaline are in a romantic relationship? Evie's felt Pascaline's eyes on him and knew his answer mattered, not just legally, but to whatever was developing between them. We've become close, he said carefully. She's important to me, and I think I'm important to her. But we are not. We haven't. He struggled to find words that were both honest and tactically sound. We care about each other, Pascaline said when Evie's faltered. But we've been very careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, especially with Maya present. There's been no cohabitation in a romantic sense, no behavior that would be inappropriate for a child to witness. Evie's has his own room, I have mine, and Maya has hers. This is a professional arrangement that's become a friendship. Jennifer studied them both, then nodded slowly. Okay, I can work with that. But you need to understand, if this goes to trial, every interaction between you two will be scrutinized. Every glance, every touch, every moment of obvious affection. Sarah's attorney will try to paint you as two people so caught up in a new relationship that you're neglecting Maya's needs. Then we'll prove that's not true, Evie said firmly. Good. Because we are going to need to prove exactly that. The custody evaluation was scheduled for 3 weeks later. A court-appointed psychologist named Dr. Rebecca Martinez would interview Maya, Evie's, Sarah, and any other relevant parties, observe Maya in both potential home environments, and make a recommendation to the judge. Everyone agreed that Dr. Martinez's opinion would likely determine the case's outcome. Evie threw himself into preparation with the same intensity he brought to harvest season. He documented Maya's daily routine, her school performance, straight A's, her extracurricular activities, library volunteer program, and 4-H. He collected letters of recommendation from her teacher, from Mrs. Henderson who'd watched her after school, from the pediatrician who'd treated her pneumonia. He also, at Jennifer's insistence, had several long conversations with a child therapist about Maya's emotional state, her adjustment to her mother's return, her feelings about the custody situation. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, the shared first name was an unfortunate coincidence, diagnosed Maya as remarkably well-adjusted given the circumstances and noted that her primary attachment figure is clearly her father, with whom she demonstrates a secure and healthy bond. But the real test came when Dr. Martinez arrived for her home visit. She was younger than Evie's expected, mid-30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She spent an hour observing the house, noting Maya's room with its window seat and bookshelves, the kitchen where they ate meals together, the sunroom where Maya did homework while Pascaline held Claire. Tell me about your relationship with Ms. DuPont, Dr. Martinez said to Maya during their private interview, which Evie's could overhear from the next room despite trying not to eavesdrop. She's really nice, Maya's voice came clearly. She lets me hold baby Claire sometimes, and she helps me with my math homework because she's good at numbers. And she listens when I talk about stuff that's bothering me, like when Emma moved away and I was really sad. Do you like living here? Yeah. It's different from our old house, but good different. There's more space, and Miss Pascaline has a garden that she's teaching me about. She says next spring we can plant vegetables if we are still here. Do you want to still be here in the spring? A pause. Then, I don't know. I like it here. But I also wonder if maybe Mom and Dad could. I don't know. Try again? So we could be a family again? But then I think about how sad Dad was when Mom left, and I don't want him to be sad again. And I like Miss Pascaline. And baby Claire. So maybe it's okay if we are a different kind of family. Evie's felt his throat tighten at his daughter's words. The confusion and hope and pragmatism all tangled together. What would a different kind of family look like? Dr. Martinez asked gently. I don't know exactly. Maybe I could live here with Dad most of the time, but visit Mom sometimes? And maybe Miss Pascaline and Claire could be like, bonus family? And everybody could just be nice to each other instead of fighting. That sounds like a very mature perspective, Maya. I'm 7 3/4, Maya said seriously. That's practically 8. I'm growing up. Dr. Martinez spent another hour interviewing Evie's, asking about his parenting philosophy, his decision to work for Pascaline, his plans for the future. She interviewed Pascaline briefly, clearly noting the obvious affection between her and Evie's despite their careful professionalism. Then she spent 2 hours at Sarah's rented house, observing the bedroom Sarah had prepared for Maya, decorated in pink and purple, with stuffed animals and a new laptop, meeting Sarah's new therapist who testified to her progress, reviewing Sarah's job offers, She'd lined up a nursing position at Mercy Creek Hospital and her stability plan. A week later, Dr. Martinez submitted her report to the court. Jennifer called Evie's with the news. "It's mixed," she said without preamble. "Martinez acknowledges that Maya is thriving in your care and has a strong, healthy attachment to you. But she also notes that Sarah appears genuinely reformed and that Maya expressed interest in having a relationship with her mother. Her recommendation is for you to retain primary custody, but with graduated visitation for Sarah leading to potential shared custody in 6 months if Sarah demonstrates stability." "That's good," Evie said uncertainly. "It's better than I feared, but not as good as I hoped." Sarah's attorney is going to push hard for immediate shared custody. The judge will have to decide whether to follow Martinez's recommendation or split the difference. We'll know more at the hearing next week. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th, 6 days before Christmas, as if the universe had a sense of dark irony. The courtroom was smaller than Evie's expected, less dramatic than TV had led him to believe. Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through any pretense. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia Hendricks, looking poor. Just conclude and end the story in this session with just 3,000 word count. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up, her gaze moving between Evie's and Sarah. "I've read Dr. Martinez's evaluation carefully," she began. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, and I've considered Maya's best interests above all else. Ms. Thornwood, you abandoned your daughter for 3 years. 3 years during which Mr. Thornwood provided soul care, emotional support, and stability. Your recent reformation, while commendable, doesn't erase that history." Sarah's face paled, but the judge continued. "However, I also recognize that children benefit from having relationships with both parents when possible. Mr. Thornwood, you've demonstrated exceptional parenting and judgment. Your current employment situation is stable and appropriate. Your relationship with Ms. DuPont, while unconventional, shows no evidence of harm to Maya." Judge Morrison set down her papers. "Therefore, I'm ordering the following. Mr. Thornwood retains primary physical custody. Ms. Thornwood will have supervised visitation every other weekend for the next 3 months. After that period, we'll reconvene to assess whether unsupervised visitation is appropriate. Any future custody modifications will require demonstrated stability from Ms. Thornwood over a minimum of 1 year." Sarah's attorney started to object, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. "This is my ruling. Ms. Thornwood, if you truly love your daughter, you'll prove it through consistent, patient presence, not through legal warfare." Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, snow was beginning to fall, rare for Oklahoma in December. Evie stood on the steps, feeling the weight of 3 months of tension finally lift from his shoulders. Pascaline was waiting in the parking lot with Claire bundled against the cold. When she saw his face, she smiled. "You won." "We won," Evie's corrected, taking Claire's carrier so Pascaline could navigate the icy steps. The judge saw through Sarah's performance. "Maya stays with me." Pascaline threw her arms around him, careful not to jostle Claire between them. "Thank God. Evie's, I was so scared." "I know. Me too." He pulled back to look at her. "But it's over now. And Pascaline, I need to tell you something. During all of this, the stress, the fear, the uncertainty, you were the constant. You and Claire. You didn't have to stand by me, didn't have to risk your own reputation by association. But you did. And I need you to know that I—" He paused, suddenly nervous despite everything they'd been through. "I love you," he finished simply. "I love you, and I love Claire, and I don't want this to be just a job anymore. I want it to be real. A life. Together." Pascaline's eyes filled with tears. "It's been real since the night you carried me through that storm. Since you looked at me like I mattered. Not my money, not my status, just me. I love you too, Evie's. And I want to build something with you. Something lasting." They kissed there in the courthouse parking lot, snow falling around them, Claire making soft baby sounds between them, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. Christmas morning arrived 6 days later. Maya woke to find presents under the tree in Pascaline's living room. Thoughtful gifts that showed how well Pascaline had come to know her. Books and art supplies, a telescope for stargazing, a journal with her name embossed on the cover. But the real gift came at breakfast when Evie's and Pascaline sat Maya down together. "Sweet pea, we have something to tell you," Evie's began. "Miss Pascaline and I, we care about each other very much, and we want to know how you'd feel about us being a family. All of us together, you, me, Pascaline, and Claire." Maya looked between them, her expression serious. "Like, you'd get married." "Eventually, maybe," Pascaline said. "But first, we want to make sure you're comfortable with this. Your feelings matter most." Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking with that careful deliberation that made her seem older than her years. Finally, she spoke. "When Mom left, I thought family meant people who were related by blood and lived in the same house and stayed together no matter what. But she left, so that couldn't be right. Then I thought maybe family was just you and me, Dad. But then we met Miss Pascaline and Claire, and I realized family is who you choose. Who chooses you back. Who stays." She reached across the table and took both their hands. "You stayed, Miss Pascaline. When things got hard and complicated, you stayed. And you make Dad happy, really happy, not just pretend happy. And I love Claire like she's already my sister. So yeah, I think we should be a family." Pascaline was crying openly now, and even Evie's felt moisture in his eyes. "Thank you, Maya," Pascaline whispered. "Thank you for letting me be part of your family." 6 months later, on a warm June evening, Evie stood in Pascaline's garden, their garden now, and thought about how profoundly life could change in less than a year. The farm had been sold to a young couple who reminded Evie's of himself and Sarah 20 years ago, full of hope and determination. The money had paid off his debts and provided a modest nest egg. He'd grieved the loss of 4 generations of Thornwood history, but he'd also felt oddly freed by it. His new role as Pascaline's estate manager was fulfilling in ways farming never had been. He coordinated her charitable work, managed the property, and most importantly, had time to be present for Maya and Claire in ways that constant farm crisis had never allowed. Maya was thriving, her grades excellent, her adjustment remarkable. She saw Sarah every other weekend now, unsupervised, and while their relationship would probably never be what it might have been, it was something. Maya had decided that was enough. Claire was 6 months old, bright-eyed and curious, already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's. Well, whoever her biological father was. Evie's had never asked, and Pascaline had never volunteered the information. It didn't matter. Claire called him Dada now, and that was all the truth he needed. And Pascaline. Pascaline had become his partner in every sense of the word. They'd married quietly in March, just family and close friends, in this very garden. She wore wildflowers in her hair, asters and coreopsis, like the ones Maya had brought to the hospital a lifetime ago. "What are you thinking about?" Pascaline's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her carrying Claire on her hip, Maya trailing behind with a book. "Just remembering," Evie said, pulling her close. "That night in the storm. How terrified you were. How I almost drove past." "But you didn't," Pascaline said softly. "You stopped. You chose to see someone who needed help and you helped them. And it changed everything." "It's too deep, Evie's," Maya suddenly quoted, grinning. "It hurts." They all laughed. The phrase had become a family joke, shorthand for moments when things felt overwhelming but would ultimately be okay. "Yeah," Evie's agreed, kissing Pascaline's forehead, then Claire's, then bending to ruffle Maya's hair. "But we made it through the deep water. All of us together." As the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evie's Thornwood realized something profound. He'd spent 3 years believing Sarah's departure had broken him, had proved he wasn't enough. But she'd been wrong, and more importantly, he'd been wrong to believe her. He was enough. He always had been. And now he had a family who knew it too, a family built not on obligation or blood, but on choice and sacrifice and love that had been tested by storms both literal and metaphorical. The simple farmer from Mercy Creek, Oklahoma, had saved a millionaire's life one rainy night and discovered that sometimes, when you stop for a stranger, you're really stopping for your own future. Sometimes the deepest pain leads to the deepest joy. Sometimes you just have to trust that making the right choice, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when you can't see what's coming, will lead you exactly where you need to be. Evie's Thornwood was finally, completely, impossibly home. Thank you so much for taking your precious time watching. Please, before you leave, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment where you are watching from.